Tonight, we are going to talk about finding gold and closing out this northwest corner. We have New Hampshire and we have Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island. So, but for right now, we're going to do New Hampshire. We'll just do one of these at a time, and in that vein, we can close out the northeast corner. The northeast corner of the U.S. has been known for gold in the past, and so we'll have people chiming in, I'm sure, who have experience in the rivers and creeks of New Hampshire, as we did in Vermont. And as people commented after the show on New York, there was gold found even there. But, you know, nobody talks about it because of this wildly rumored King's gold, law that basically says the state owns all the gold. So let's take a look at New Hampshire. New Hampshire. So let's go to the full page. All of this is done using the government gold maps. You can see that link down below, sourdoughminer.com/GGM, which stands for Government Gold Maps, and it's a method I use for using the MRDS in a specific way to create these customized maps and then to zoom in and out and find things that you need to find in terms of geology and topology and mix it up. And that's covered in that Government Gold Maps report. You can check it out on that link. So for right now, let's zoom in on these mines we see here. I'm going to switch gears a bit and zoom in closer. So as you can see outside of Concord, doesn't appear to be much registered in the way of gold here. We did see a while back that there was gold along in this region in Maine. I'm not showing it, I'm covering it up. Along in this region in Maine, okay? And so for that, we'll leave that for now, but it is an important aspect of expectation that whatever put gold out here would continue to have some gold, maybe perhaps off the coast. Hard to say. Check your lobster pots. So anyway, in New Hampshire, we do have, north of Concord, several mines that are called out. Here's one that caught my attention when I was looking at this. It's called the White Diamond Mine. Don't know what they mean by that, so let's take a look. So gold is the primary commodity coming from this mine. The location data is pulled up. Let's take a look. And we have a registry of 1957 for the references. That's relatively recent. And it doesn't say what kind of operation it was, whether it's placer or lode, and there's no real indication of what they were finding here other than gold. So that's insufficient for us to kind of dig further, if you will. And of course, there's another reference here, White Diamond Mine. See if it says anything more about it. Eastern Field Operations Center, 1957 mineral resources. So there's really no information other than there was gold found in this area. And that would lead me to believe that, okay, there is something up in this area. We might try zooming in just for fun and see what the area looks like. It might give us a hint as to whether there's something going on there. Again, it's one of these areas that looks fairly heavily foliaged, if you will. And it looks like maybe outdoors kind of country. That's an interesting spot right there. This is the kind of thing that you want to keep your eyes open for. Yeah, there may be something, in terms of the actual location. Oftentimes these things are off by hundreds of yards. It just depends on how old the mine is. It is interesting, this part. I could be reading too much into it. It could be some farm rubbish pile, or it could be tailings pile from a gold mine. The thing you'd have to have is a higher resolution picture, which these obviously are as high as we can go. I mean, we can practically make out the guy's license plate as it is. But it is interesting that it is on the edge of this, kind of forested area and so forth. So that's kind of important. It's also interesting that that's the White Diamond Mine and that's the White Diamond Mine. So you kind of wonder which one is really the White Diamond, or is this whole area part of what was the White Diamond Mine? It's hard to say. That's just food for thought. I don't see anything in the immediate zone. There is some stuff here that looks a bit like somebody was doing some kind of slash operation and maybe some kind of mineral surface stuff. There's lots of rocks here. Don't look like beehives. Looks more like rocks, but they're stacked pretty neatly. And so that's possibly what was going on there. Just can't tell. Okay, so that's the nature of what's going on in New Hampshire. It's going to be hit and miss. A lot of people have reported, though, in New Hampshire and Vermont both, that they get pretty good gold in some of these regions in the creeks and rivers, feeding off of some of the old granitic materials and some of there's some interfaces where there's granitic materials, and then there's some older metamorphic materials, gneisses and schists and things like that. That's not uncommon to find that kind of interface to have a fair amount of material that looks very interesting from a gold prospecting point of view. A lot of this looks like the same thing we saw in Maine, where we've had glaciers scrape and scoop through this area, and so gold may be redistributed in ways that we would not expect. Let's try one of these ones down a little closer, the Ney prospect here. Both of these, all of these seem to have downturn picks, which essentially indicate that the mine is closed. It was a mine. This one indicates the primary commodity was copper, gold, and silver. So now we're back into probably those sulfides again, like chalcopyrites. Past producer, Ney's mine. Again, this one's 1948. So remember, we talked about this northeast region. They were looking for copper pretty heavily for war effort. And then this would be after the war. So somehow they recorded what they were up to, but, maybe doing additional research for other metals. But copper, gold, and silver is what they found. So let's go back and look a little bit more. Here we are on the border. This is kind of funny. This one's not even in the state, but yet it's on the map for that state. It was a past producer. Primary commodity was silver, gold, and copper, which should probably be kind of a combination of ores. War mineral, remember we talked about that. Here we are, the war mineral report. So this is all part of the war effort and understanding where our mineral resources were and the status of them to prepare to, feed the war machine, World War II. Sulfur pyrites, here we are, copper, molybdenum, lead. So this is Lebanon 185 road cut. There you go. Now I had one of you guys chimed in from Ontario. I'm trying to remember. So basically about a road cut that had indicators that looked like what I was showing in the way of gold. So they sent me some pictures, and yep, it looks pretty interesting. There's stringers of quartz going through, and there's lots of rusty crud and blackened kind of material. That's what you're looking for. There was also an indication that the rocks had an assemblage of rocks that were cracked, and the fissures had faulted up through there and injected that quartz. That's perfect for load. Now what you're looking for in some of the pictures that he had, you're looking for them to be dark and red and stained and ugly. Rotting quartz is better than, he showed me some good quartz which looked white and maybe a little off-white, kind of an orangey yellow, but not deep dark red. But later when he went back, he found some deep dark red. So you just got to keep an idea that you're looking for those sulfides, and the sulfides are going to produce sulfuric acid, and any iron that's in there is going to go boom right to iron oxide, and iron sulfide and all kinds of crud is going to turn into some really messy looking stained rotting tooth material. So that's what you're looking for when you're digging in those areas. Keep that in mind. Now let's look at this guy. Reservoir Hill Mine is lead, silver, and gold. So now we're getting into some interesting stuff. And notice the kind of terrain we're looking at here looks different. We're seeing what looks like some hilly structures and some kind of areas where it's clearings that you really perhaps can't grow much because it's so rocky, or it's exposed bedrock. That starts looking kind of attractive too, and not aviation bedrock. Now in this case it's a lot of clearings in the forest, and you have to go look underneath the freeway to find it. So take it with a grain of gold salts. This is going to be interesting. But that was a road cut, so when they were doing this road cut, they found something. Let's see if that holds true with what the records show, because that would indicate that's a relatively recent finding. Nope, there's no indication. It is lenses and veins, so this is a lode. Okay, what they found was phyllite, which is a type of schist, and then they found this sulfur, pyrite, copper, molybdenum, and lead. Easy for you to say. So that's an interesting find, and kind of gives an idea of what there is in New Hampshire, right on the border between it and Vermont. So again, we talked about Vermont having all of these kind of hilly mountain regions. This has a similar kind of set of structures up here. It's funny that, you know, with the gold that was found along the coast here toward Portland in Maine, that there wouldn't be more gold found down along in here. That would make me, I wonder if there's something about, you know, something about the political structure, the existing places, or if there's something about the way glaciers and whatnot move through here that made it so the gold doesn't show up. I just find it suspicious. Doesn't mean there's anything to see, but it does mean, you know, oftentimes you can get into a situation where in one area the gold-bearing ores are unearthed because of the angle. You know, we talked about dip and strike, the angle of the material and its exposure. So for example, you know, there's gold in the Grand Canyon down deep, but if you want to get gold near the Grand Canyon, you got to go down deep, and there's a lot of overburden. Now, if you want to go out in the desert, you know, south of there, there's gold and there's copper and there's all that kind of stuff, but it has to be exposed, and that's what can make the difference between something that's viable in terms of economic terms or fun in terms of recreation and something that's not. And that's just simply how close is it to the surface, how much overburden are we talking? Is it miles or is it feet? It's a big difference. So and so on that note, let's see if there's any kind of questions you guys had. Let's see, Justin's from Maine, and he's still having a hard time finding gold. Yep. This whole area, the trick to it is going to be primarily looking for placer gold in rivers and creeks that are fed from areas where there's either you know, like phyllite, there's schist or metamorphic materials that are broken down and have gold in them, or there's granitic materials that have fissures that were injected into them and now they're kind of eroded and they're feeding into those streams. So the trick is to look for those streams. Finding an actual lode deposit in this area because of the glaciation and all that kind of, you know, interaction that goes on, plus all the forests, etc., it's going to be pretty tough. And that's why when I look at a map like these in the Northeast, I typically look at them for a gross picture of where we might start looking. One would be right in this area, so I'm going to draw a little map here. I'm going to mess up the map. So if I were to kind of look in this area, I would go around up in here, and then there's another area that's kind of down over in here that looks interesting, and then over here, and then what we'd have to do is turn on the map next door, and that's covered in government gold maps, but I'd kind of, you know, play with the nearby states and see what's there. And the whole reason is, if you found, you know, for example, I'm just going to mark this up. I'm not saying there is gold here, but let's say there was gold through this region like this. Why would this trend line disappear down here? You know, would it? That's the big question. Now, I'm not claiming there is one there. I'm saying check the map. But if there were, and I found it there and didn't find it next door, it's like the one we found in New York State a while back. Sure, there's no gold. Well, there were a whole bunch of mines on the border. Well, the same thing holds true here, and that is, if there are mines over here found, you know, over in Vermont, there's likely to be more mines found over in here. They just haven't been located or aren't on the USGS, you know, records. Because remember, this is just the records of claims that people have put information in, or that geologists have marked because they found it in road cuts like that freeway, and therefore there's evidence that there is gold in the region. It is not to be taken as the final step in saying where gold is or is not. I would not ever use these maps that way. I use them as a trend line. very much like, okay, then take that and go with the geology of the area, and then go with the fault lines, because gold will tend to follow fault lines as well. Why? Because remember the infusion of quartz veins into the gold will tend to shoot up through those the cracks. And so when it shoots up, it has to have, you know, some kind of a fissure to flow through, and that is a fault. And so when you see fault maps that break the surface, then look in the region for gold, and if there is, then look in the places where those faults are eroded and go into, and look down in those for placer gold. And in this particular, we're going to be looking for finer gold than you find out west. That's a fact. How much finer? It depends. I've seen some nuggets come from these areas, but the issue is, are you going to see it as commonly as you do in the west? No, I don't think so. But that doesn't mean it's not a lot of fun, and doesn't mean there's not a lot of gold either. And that can be shared by some of you guys who are working in New Hampshire, in Vermont. So Douglastown has some flakes from Milan, New Hampshire, okay? And Coos County, I think that's it for this section. Let's have a look, see what people have to say. Swift River in Maine has good gold. Coos Canyon. And Charles Hanson, it doesn't look like there are too many streams or creeks. Well, let's see if we can make that more apparent. And so you see how it all kind of shades the same way. It doesn't give me the relief differences enough to cause it to shadow. What I'm doing is playing with the lighting. It's a gimmick you can use on Google, Google Earth Pro here, and it allows you to kind of go for the time of day lighting. And then the idea is that if you look at a place that has a lot of relief, you're going to see it shade the forest and stuff accordingly. So like you can see in here where there's a little bit of relief, as I change this lighting, it kind of comes and goes. It's not as apparent. There are some streams. A lot of what you can see here looks like meandering S curves here. Now let's see if we see any up near where we had found gold. So here's the white diamond. It didn't look like it had, I think I agree with Charles, I didn't see too much in the way of large streams. That doesn't mean there aren't some gullies and stuff. But, there's nothing in here that would indicate to me that we have even a placer deposit, really. It could very well be that what we're looking at here is a sulfide exposure. Something more like what you see over here. This looks like some kind of mineral operation. And in fact, the reddish stuff here looks kind of interesting to me. I was just drawn to that because when you see that kind of variation, you start thinking sulfides and iron, pyrites and copper. But I don't see anything here. What I would do, if I had time, but I didn't pull it, I would go back and pull from the USGS copper in addition to gold here, and silver, and a few other things we've seen that are in these mines, and it would populate the map with a few more data points that would allow us to locate something like this, because this looks kind of interesting in this area. But a lot of these are, when you see ponds like that, think flat. And when you think flat, think the mountains have long since eroded, and what we're left here are big alluvial plain kind of things with some locations that are essentially backfilled stream, and now it's ponding. It's just got a dent that fills up with water and retains it. I don't see anything that would tell me that there's a big stream in that area. So now if somebody knows different, please tell me. But that's where I go with this one. I do know of several guys who go into New Hampshire frequently and find good gold. But here's Reservoir Hill Mine, lead placer gold, unknown past producer. Let's see when it was found. It indicates that 1929, unpublished mineral inventory, New Hampshire State Geological Survey. So that's a pretty old survey, but still it says that there is gold and lead. And again, we go back to galena and sulfides and things like that. So it's likely to be some kind of an occurrence that is a lode mine kind of impact, would be my suspicion. Justin says he's seen a rusty colored water running out from the side of a riverbank. Would that be a good place to look? Depends if it's an industrial output. If it's a spring and it's rusty, that kind of looks interesting. Then what I would do is kind of gently waft the odors from it. You say, what? You're sniffing for sulfur. Be careful you don't sniff too much, because arsenopyrites and sulfur pyrites go kind of together, and arsenic's pretty bad. If it smells kind of garlicky, clear out. Get away from it. If it smells kind of sulfury, like it's an old, rotten egg kind of smell, that is an indication that you've got pyrites in the region. They're oxidizing, and the reddish means that the iron in the iron pyrites is depositing iron oxide as it comes to the surface. It goes into the solution when the sulfuric acid, because what happens, it's complex, not really complex, it's pretty straightforward. The pyrite and water interact with oxygen from the air right at the water table surface. That little chemical reaction happens, and what ends up happening is it releases sulfuric acid. It releases the iron from the iron sulfide that's in there, and it goes into solution. When that comes back out, it comes out as iron oxide because it also oxidizes. And so what ends up happening is you get this H2SO4, sulfuric acid, which releases a stinky sulfury smell, a little bit of H2S, which is kind of dangerous. It's hydrogen sulfide gas. That smells like rotten eggs times 10, okay? And if you smell it very richly, you want to stay away. That's deadly poison stuff. But most cases, you just smell a hint of it, and immediately you know you're in the area of sulfides. It'll just smell kind of eggy. Kind of, if you've ever been around a vent on a hydrothermal vent from a geyser or a mud pit, and you smell like gunpowder, that's the sulfury smell you're looking for. If you saw that, in addition to seeing that red thing coming out of the side of a creek, then I'd get suspicious that somewhere back in there is a lode that's chock full of pyrite that's corroding. It's giving away its stuff. In mines, when they dig deep and they open up fissures and they blast, they let water in there, and that water interacts in that same way with the pyrites and brings out essentially what they call acid, mine waste. That acid waste is this hydrogen sulfide and sulfuric acid mixture, and it's very, very pH low, acidic, corrosive as all get out. It contains enough metals and all kinds of other stuff. It's kind of poisonous. Hey, Bob, welcome. North Carolina is late. Oklahoma is late, says Paul. Okay, so I think so New Hampshire is, sparsely identified in the USGS. I think we've got several people on board here. I'd like you guys to share your notes in the comments below about places you know of where you've found or clubs have found gold or anything like that, because it's pretty clear to me that there's probably more gold here than meets the eye. Anytime I see it this sparse in an area where it's sandwiched between two states that have indicated maybe a little more gold, I begin to wonder what else is here, because now these guys tend to indicate there's some gold along these ridges. You can kind of see them in this picture. How much? Not clear. How easy? Not clear. So we always want to kind of take that with a grain of salt, but it is indicated. See these, Charles, you were mentioning no rivers. Well, here's some river systems. You can see this dendritic pattern. Looks like a tree standing on end, okay? That's classic river system. Some of the rivers in this area in New Hampshire are kind of covered up by my rich yellow line for the state border, which has nothing to do with topology and geology. There are some places down in here where there's, here's a mountain. Remember I was talking about mountains and the sunlight. So this one's kind of highlighted. And yet there's no gold in this area, but there is over here. So it's just one of those things where, I don't know. Silver, gold, and mica. Now mica is kind of an interesting mineral because typically mica is one form of fool's gold that really is fool's gold. Typically, the only way you'll find it associated with mica with gold, is typically in one of two kinds of minerals: metamorphic schists, which have lots of mica, or granitic material, rhyolitic material, which has lots of mica. Remember we showed that biotite is a mica, and muscovite. And so those were in that chart back a few weeks ago that I showed, that showed minerals of, there was plutonic and plutonic intrusive, and then there was volcanic minerals, and they were split into, kind of what's called sialic. It's high in silica. It's usually pink or white, or it's mafic, which is black or greenish, kind of dark minerals, more of your magnetites and that kind of stuff, where you're getting into some pretty dense and heavy material that goes with gold. The problem is that in those other areas there can be micro gold injected into granite, or it can be specifically into metamorphic minerals. It can be injected into granite into fissures, that faults that go through, that have secondary hydrothermal deposits. So this kind of gets into the complexities of the whole thing, and that might be a piece of what's going on here. I don't know. Now, Eastern Field Operation, New Hampshire, 1929. So that's that same older survey, looking for minerals in between wars. And so that's kind of the story for New Hampshire for tonight. I think we'll call it a night on that and let it go. Where is gold? Check out sourdoughminer.com GGM. That'll be where you can find the government gold maps instructions report. It explains kind of how I make these custom maps, and also I'll give a little overview of what I'm looking for when I'm using them, kind of the things I'm doing in these shows. So check it out. And hey, good to see you guys, and good prospecting. We have 20 people on right now. Awesome. Saturday night.